So hi, I'm Rudy Rodriguez. I'm uh, the current board chair for the American Board of Internal Medicine for nephrology. I'm a nephrologist at the University of Washington and the Seattle VA, and also the medicine service chief there at the Seattle VA. Spent half of my career at San Francisco General Hospital before moving to the Seattle VA in 2007. Joined the ABIM board in 2014 and became the chair in 2020, I think. So it's a pleasure to be with you today, Paul. I'll let you introduce yourself. If you could just tell us a little bit about your story, not only I think about your own health condition, but your career in politics and government.
Sure. Thanks, Rudy. Well, my name is Paul Conway, and also serve on the nephrology specialty board under Chairman Rodriguez. And I'm a non-professional member and have the honor to serve ABIM. I've been a kidney patient for 46 years now. I'm 26 years out as of May 8th on my kidney transplant. And prior to that, I did 3 years of home dialysis and was a chronic disease patient being monitored since the age of 16. So I've kind of been through the arena. I was first diagnosed in a sports physical, and it happened to be that my doctor, who was in a small town in Maine, had retired to the town after serving NASA in the space program, the Apollo program, and also the SR-71 program. So he had a routine of screening people. He was from England. He was a flight surgeon for the Royal Air Force who had been detailed over to the United States. And everybody that he put through sports physicals, he did routine urine and blood tests. And as I learned later, that's not routine as a screening. So I was able to have my disease detected very early. And it kind of became the thing that I would carry around with me every month for blood tests as I monitored my kidney function. And when my kidneys finally did fail, I was 29, and I was serving at the time as Deputy Secretary of Health in the state of Virginia. A lot of challenges along the way. I had hoped to go into the military. My father had served in the military. My grandfather had served. I learned that that would not be the case with kidney disease, and so I pursued a career in public policy and politics. Started out in 1980 on the Reagan campaign, and since that time, I've served under 4 presidents and now 4 governors in the state of Virginia. But kidney disease is always one of those things that kind of intersects my career in an opportunity to either elevate patients or to try to impact policy. And so that's what I try to do, is blend several worlds together and make it an optimistic journey, as opposed to kind of living in the depths of the negative side of kidney disease.
Paul, along with your government service, I think you've obviously been very involved with the American Association of Kidney Patients, and you chair the policy and global affairs for them. So can you tell us a little bit about how that started, kind of the global emphasis?
Yeah, the AAKP has a long history. It's one of their founding patients dialyzed in front of the United States Congress in 1972, and that led to the passage of the end-stage renal disease program in 1972, established in 73. And when I was going to my doctor's appointments, when I was first diagnosed, I would see magazines in the waiting area, and there was one by AAKP, and I would read about patients and how they were managing things. And so when I came out of the Bush administration in 2009, I reached out and said, I'm in Washington, I can handle some policy issues for them, and got involved then, went on the board. But probably the most pivotal event in our expansion into global was an opportunity that I had in 2018 to go and speak at a United Nations panel on aging and ethics. And at that panel discussion, most of the representatives were from either other countries or from non-government organizations. And it seemed that the focus was about the burdens of chronic kidney disease, not necessarily upon patients, but upon healthcare systems and, more importantly, governments, and how increased medical utilization by patients was a negative thing, had high economic consequences, and that patient expectations to live were unrealistic. And so I was sitting there, I was looking in the audience. There were several members of the audience who clearly had um, disabilities and some challenges in wheelchairs and other things like that. And as I listened closely, the theme that came about, obviously with aging, is end of life. But what troubled me was that patients were unrealistic in their expectations. There was no discussion of innovation. There was no discussion of patient engagement in determining outcomes. And I thought to myself, this is just so unlike everything else my friends and I do in Washington and other places. What could we do more for patients around the world so they had a larger voice in the process? And from that experience, I came back, I talked to some of my fellow leaders at AAKP, and I decided, we could actually have a global impact if we organized patients and doctors and industry around the world to raise the voice of patients everywhere, and especially those with kidney disease. And we took off from there, and we were able to secure a great partnership with George Washington University School of Medicine and Health Sciences under Dr. Dominic Raj to host a global forum each year at George Washington. But that's really where it came from, was sitting there and listening to conversations about patients that did not involve patients, and patients being a burden, and almost in a sense being uneducated and unable to manage their lives. And I just have a completely different view, as do many patients, I think, around the world, and clearly here in the U.S.
Before we talk a little bit more about the global summit on kidney disease, it was the 2018 panel you were on. The time you thought it was almost discriminatory, and if you could just provide a little bit more details about, I think, what really stuck with you as far as what people were saying.
Sure. So one of the issues that's out there, and it's a common point of discussion, is this whole issue of quality adjusted life years and quality adjusted life year data, and how that's used in public policy. And so in many countries that do not have the economy and the types of access that we do in the United States, and a special kidney program, patients with chronic diseases beyond just kidney disease are seen as a burden on the national economy. And that's really where the discussion was headed, which was some patients, their quality of life is simply not the same as folks who are unaffected by chronic disease. And therefore, there's a certain point where you invest too many resources. And so the troubling thing about that from an ethical standpoint, and actually a moral standpoint for me, was that you had individuals that were free in their discussion talking about the fact that somehow somebody's life was not of the same value as another, simply by nature of the disease that had afflicted them at no cause of their own in many cases. And to me, it just struck me as odd and troubling. And then further, the discussion about aging, I think, is important because, as people age, they have many different conditions. But if at a certain point you start setting goalposts, you have to ask the question, who's setting the goalposts and to what end? And if you're a patient that could be impacted by those decisions, you should have a voice at that table. And clearly in some countries, they do not. In fact, at one point in the discussion, there was almost a short shrift given to the role of patient advocates as if they were annoying. And in some of the comments after the panel discussion, a similar theme from some of the officials. Other officials were very open. They thought greater engagement should happen. But it really struck me that for so many people around the world, it must be an uphill challenge, and we can help. We can provide skills. We can provide a sense of community, can provide encouragement to keep going.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I mean, I look back to when I first became a nephrologist and attending kind of national meetings. One of the most interesting part of it had been going to kind of the data sessions, looking at registries from around the world. One of the interesting part of the registries is that there are very low incidence and prevalence of dialysis treatments in certain countries, unrelated to, I wish it was because they didn't have kidney disease, but it's because people, aren't treated, obviously. And even in a place like Mexico, actually there's a nephrologist there named Guillermo Garcia, who wrote a paper called "The Tragedy of Having ESRD in Mexico," and it's kind of related to the fact that the uninsured there, which are about half, don't actually have much options for dialysis or transplantation. Um, the other thing that sticks out is I've kind of reviewed papers from out of Africa where dialysis is sometimes available, but you have to pay. And I've seen heard these stories of people basically depleting all the money they have, and then dialysis basically is stopped at that point. So that is obviously difficult to deal with. I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the Global Summit of Kidney Disease and kind of what do you think what have you been hearing as far as some of the other countries where dialysis is not as isn't offered necessarily to everyone?
Well, the interesting thing about it is America is a unique thing because it's the only disease-specific entitlement program in the United States, the end-stage renal disease program that covers dialysis and transplantation. And so we really are a platinum standard compared to many other countries. And the thing that's fascinating to me about Africa is I've had conversations over the past several years with representatives of the government of Ethiopia. That was through the U.S. Department of Commerce, who are taking a look at the American model and the amount of resource intensiveness that accompanies that in terms of brick and mortar dialysis facilities, the demand on clean water, and that they're simply not able to replicate that in many places in Africa. And so the idea of home dialysis is very strong there. I've had discussions and have been introduced to one of the first transplant patients ever in Zambia. And he works to try to get patients interested in preemptive transplant and transplantation and to try to expand that pool of expertise in Zambia as a patient advocate. And then you have other countries like Kenya where you have some greater access to dialysis, but patients have organized to try to target areas of prevention, diet, and nutrition to bend the curve of those who end up like that. But what you see worldwide, I think, is a growing demand for innovations that, from a policy perspective, are less resource intensive and are more sensitive to environmental concerns, water, plastic, medical waste, and that are more intuitive to patients. And so you're seeing a tremendous coalescing around the idea of artificial implantable technologies or wearable technologies and clearly home dialysis. But on this issue of where innovation is headed, there's tremendous hope on that. And we've been able to highlight several of the different types of technologies at the Global Summit. And some of those include xenotransplantation, the development of artificial organs, the use of microchips and wafer technology on implantables. And so I think what you're seeing is the patient consumer base internationally is going to be ready for a product before it comes out, as opposed to products that get developed and then they have to be marketed. I actually think that patient consumers around the world are going to drive demand in large part, as you've identified, because so many people don't have insurance coverage that could handle traditional, but you do have governments and large influencers in different countries interested in what a different type of technology would be because their governments are already paying and their societies are already paying the high cost of non-treatment and or emergency only treatment.
So it's impressive the global summit that you helped kind of organize and found in 2019 is, I think it started, right? And then if you could just tell us a little bit about how it's grown, from the number of countries involved, number of viewers, and the topics that you covered during the summit.
Sure. So in 2019, we were able to launch it. We did it at that point, obviously pre-COVID. We did it live and in person, and then also simulcasted it. And so where it essentially originated from is I was in the hospital being treated with acute kidney injury. And coming out of that experience, I had a conversation with one of my doctors, Dominic Raj, and he said, let's do something big together. He's very creative. And so I pitched to him this idea of doing something that was virtual. And they have a auditorium at GW that they used to show the television show Crossfire, political show, which I was familiar with. So we did it there in the auditorium. We had an audience of around 400 or 500, and at that point, I think we were streaming at it. I think we hit about 50 countries at that point, and many of the topics were focused on current standard of care around the world and where innovation might go. Then in 2020, we were hit clearly with COVID. We went to all virtual. And what happened was we exploded in terms of the number of topics due to the format we could cover in shorter format, the number of speakers. We hit over 50 countries, I think at that point, or over 80 countries, I think at that point. We had an audience that had grown from 2019 of over 10,000 to close to 20,000. And what we've done is we've evolved the agenda to reflect current issues. So we had several years of COVID programming. This year we will hit COVID again in terms of what are the next steps for new therapies. But you're also seeing other issues evolve into the agenda, including emergency response in certain types of disaster. We're going to cover the hurricane in Puerto Rico and what the response was to that. We're going to also be covering what happens in a region that's war-torn. So we'll have one of the nephrologists coming in from Kiev, from the Ukraine, via satellite to give a presentation on that, and some of the people that are involved in getting emergency assistance there. So we try to keep it timely. We have a combination of government officials. This morning we just confirmed that we'll be honored to have former Secretary Azar talking about 4 years after the executive order on advancing American kidney health. Where are we in terms of innovation and pushing higher goals for earlier intervention and home dialysis and some of the issues like that patients were involved in helping develop.
And obviously it's costly and probably a long way off before we can provide therapies for kidney failure. But obviously there must be a big focus on prevention. It's interesting now we're probably 20 years plus into this whole trying to understand Mesoamerican nephropathy, or chronic kidney disease of unknown cause. The sad part, of course, are people that develop those diseases usually don't have a dialysis option. So if you could just say a little bit about what the summit covers as far as prevention and trying to identify some of the causes.
Sure. So we usually have a component in there where we highlight, obviously, the science. And so some of the leading edge developments that are coming out of the Kidney Precision Medicine Project, which, as you know, the central hub of that is at the University of Washington under Dr. Jonathan Himmelfarb, has some very exciting developments coming out in terms of some of the issues related to acute kidney injury and how they drive kidney failure. In terms of some of the other issues related to diabetic kidney disease and the prevention of that progression through therapeutics and through diet. We're very focused on the role of nutrition and environmental factors that can influence kidney health. And in that regard, we have Dr. Ray Van Holder from the European Kidney Health Association speaking about some of the research work that's happening in Europe on that topic, on environmental impacts on people. And so we try to showcase both the science and the innovation, and it's patient-led. So we have patients that are not just the hosts of the sessions, but we also have the patients posing the questions and moderating throughout the event, which I think makes it slightly unique. We think at this point right now, we'll probably hit over 20,000 easily, probably close to 25,000 viewers this year. In our countries, we're still calculating where the registrations are coming in from, but we're already over 100 countries that will be participating this year online and with people in person.
That's impressive. I think all this work probably led to the World Health Organization kind of identifying you and kind of featuring you in one of their publications. It's titled "Intention to Action Series: People Power." And I think they have come to realize that people like you hold the key to designing effective interventions. Can you just tell us a little bit about kind of your involvement and some of the other case studies that were included in the piece?
Sure. So this is the exciting thing, I think, for not just kidney patients, but for any patient around the world that has a chronic disease who's in a country that does not have a high economic standard or a strong economy, and they're worried about what their future path is. And so you have organizations like the WHO and others, the Pan American Health Organization, PAHO, that are really driving the agenda in terms of setting priorities. And so I came to the attention of WHO largely because of a lot of the work that American Association of Kidney Patients has done in the global arena, raising the voice of kidney patients. So back in 2021, the UN was taking a look at patient engagement mechanisms and how they can encourage more patients to become involved with science and public policy and new practices of medicine. And this has been a priority for WHO, and it's been a nice marriage of interests for patient advocates around the world, because what they were able to do is take some case studies of patients all over. One of my good friends, Anu from Nepal, is a heart patient, and they talked to us about our different stories, either trying to access and have an impact through political systems, how to have a shared voice in medical decision making, how to work with researchers. And they did case studies on what our journey was like, what mechanisms we used to impact things, and how patients in a similar situation could raise their voice. The reason why it was important to participate, I think, with them is because they were planning on creating a new engagement tool for WHO work, so they can start hearing more directly from patients about how the disease impacts them, their families, their communities. And we actually believe at AAKP and other patient activists that are involved in kidney medicine around the world believe that we have an opportunity to elevate kidney disease on the WHO priority list, because right now it's not even in the top 5. We would like to change that and get it into the top 5 issues that are focused on, because when the WHO and the UN defined a health agenda, usually resources and policy priorities follow. And sometimes there's a lot of debate about that, but we think it would be good for patients, especially in those countries that don't have access.
It's kind of a good segue probably into how do you think, for the ABIM nephrology or other diplomates listen to this, how can they get involved, or why should they get involved in some of these global issues?
Well, I think the reason why it's important is to understand that kidney disease is a universal killer. I know that medical professionals, based on their expertise and their training, they recognize that. But I think there's a lot to be said in peer-to-peer conversations, in understanding the circumstances that other medical professionals go through with their patients. And I think there's some key learnings that folks that are listening who are ABIM diplomats can have. But just as importantly, I think there's a tremendous amount of information that doctors here in the U.S. and those who are ABIM certified can share with other doctors about how to engage patients, how to work effectively in the policy arena, and how to advance new treatment technologies and methods through professional societies, which so many are involved in. I think it would be an optimistic and encouraging thing, because so many of the doctors I talk to that are around the world, they're overwhelmed. But the context of being overwhelmed oftentimes, I think, could be better informed or changed if they simply have a partnership or a friendship with somebody here in the U.S. That is managing a practice just as big, or has some techniques that they've developed along the way to get that patient voice and family better involved, so that patients start taking greater ownership of some of the issues that they're managing.
And for any patients that may be listening, 2018 isn't that long ago when you were sitting on that panel and being a little taken aback by what you heard. But I think we've come a long way in listening to patients. What's your message to patients out there and getting involved?
Well, I tell you what, there's little barrier to entry to get involved with so many different patient organizations. You have fine groups like the National Kidney Foundation. You have Home Dialyzers United. You have a Kidney Patient Congress with the transplant societies here in the U.S. And you have our organization, AAKP, which folks can come on and join at no cost, aakp.org. But I would encourage both patients and professionals to be involved in patient organizations, because it's not going to take any money out of your wallet to participate, but the knowledge that you can get, I think, is important. and to understand what the voice of patients and the needs of patients are directly beyond those who are just sitting in your office. The other thing I would tell you is this. I think the U.S. has been absolutely phenomenal through the FDA and the NIH, the Department of Defense Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program, and the VA in sincerely reaching out to patients and their families and incorporating that voice. FDA in particular, I have the opportunity to serve as the chair of the Patient Engagement Advisory Committee for Medical Devices. So they actually use patient insight data in the regulatory process to inform packages that are coming in for medical device approval. They want you to have collaborations with patients. And the reason why I think professionals should be involved in this process also is because then you're not simply on the research side, you're also cross-hatting yourself with innovation and with the patient stakeholders. And I think doctors play a hugely influential role when they can be effective in each of those arena and public policy. So I would encourage folks, whether you're a patient or a professional, to get into the arena, join these organizations, understand their policy priorities and their needs. And I think inevitably it'll make you more effective in whatever you're doing.
I think as we wrap up, maybe we can post some resources, but any resources for folks that you want to mention?
Sure, I can make the WHO information available on the guide after this. We can also make information available on our organization and several others that folks can join or to at least get informed through their newsletter. Our global summit is coming up on June 28th and 29th. And again, that's free of charge for folks to watch. And, I would just tell folks that if you have any questions, I can give my information also. Reach out and be active. I know everybody's very busy, but having a patient perspective, I think, is a good thing, and having it at scale, I think, will make you even more effective at your
Great.
local level.
Well, Paul, thank you so much for doing this and sharing your experience. I think this has been, will hopefully be helpful for folks, and really appreciate everything you do in the nephrology community.
Thanks a lot, Rudy. I appreciate it.